Zach has had this book all summer. It seems like this Beano
I'm a
Cook
slow
book.
reader.
That's okay. No, I'm just trying to give some context as to how this all came about. And the book is about Beano Cook. It's his life story, more or
It
less.
is.
And John D. Lucas is the author. The book is brilliantly titled "Haven't They Suffered Enough?" I just love that title. And John is with us now here on Ruskin and Zach. Hi, John. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm really appreciate this and glad to tell some Beano stories.
So, how did this all come about with this project for you?
You know, it started about 20 years ago. I wrote Beano a letter. I was in high school, and going back even further now, I guess 25 years ago. I'm really dating myself. You know, I wanted to be like covering college football. I wanted to do what you guys are doing, what Beano did. You know, talk about college football on the air. You know, write stories in newspapers, things like that. And I was looking for a mentor. You know, he's a guy from Pittsburgh. I live 20 miles down the road from Pittsburgh. I'm thinking maybe this guy will, he'll help me out. And sure enough, he wrote back to me and, you know, sent me a letter, gave me the time to call, his home phone number, and we just hit it off. We went from there. A couple years later, he says, "Hey, a lot of people have been asking me to, put my stories down in writing and, talk about my life in television and sports and things like that, and I need help." And I didn't really know what he was getting after at the time, but he was asking me to help him write his autobiography. So it was a huge honor.
One of the things that, I mean, in reading the book that was, I guess, struck me the most was as I'm reading it, and it is literally just him talking, and you're just sort of, I guess, capturing what he's saying. But I mean, you can hear his voice when you're reading it. It's Beano talking about just about everything. It jumps all over the place. The stories are fantastic. But how do you, as the person who has to organize all this, get all of this together and, I mean, put it all together in one book?
To be honest, Beano, you met him. You know what he was like. You guys watch him on TV all those years. He was the exact same guy in real life as he was on TV. And he was kind of like the Kramer character in Seinfeld. He was out there. And, he started putting these notes together a couple years before I was born. He was working for the Miami Dolphins doing PR, and he started putting notes on the back of releases from the 1974 NFL season. And, he started stacking up all these manila file folders and turned this stuff over to me. And he says, "Here, this is a loose way that it's going to read, and here's the stories I want to get in." And then the rest of it, I just sat there with a tape recorder, and we just went from there. He just started riffing and going off and, telling different stories and talking about different people. And there were things where I would sort of, press him a little bit, sort of, try to flesh out some more details and things like that. But mostly it was a conversation between two people. So it's a great compliment. You heard his voice and you read it in his voice. That's exactly what I'm going after. So it's, if you watch Beano on College Game Day or the Saturday Night Scoreboard Show or the sports reporters on Sunday morning and, all of his TV hits, it's the exact same storytelling style that he did on TV for all those years.
Yeah, I want to talk about his involvement with the '69 shootout coming up in a little bit. But John, I mean, it was just struck me that everybody knows Lee Corso, but before that was Beano Cook, and he was on the initial College Game Day with Tim Brando when the show started in the '80s.
Yeah, and the anniversary of that first show, 35th anniversary of the first College Game Day. I was in the studio at that time. They didn't, go out to all the games of the week, for a couple of years. But Beano was a big part of that. He was one of the guys that, it wasn't his idea to come up with the show, but he was the one. If you read the book, he's the one that kept it going for many years. I mean, a lot of, especially younger fans, they have no idea that that show was, it was almost like filmed in somebody's garage for a couple of years. And Beano was the guy who, he pressed the producers, let's do this, let's do that. He had input with all the stories, and him and Brando, they helped put the whole thing together. And Coach Corso, who I got to know when I worked for Game Day a couple of years later, he took a lot from Beano. He watched Beano, and he sort of, was his understudy for a couple of years. And Beano did all that original stuff that a lot of people think of when you think of Corso now with the headgear and, making all the crazy lines and sort of the comic relief element of that show. Beano did that early on, and there's a continuation factor there. So it's kind of neat to see that evolution. And Beano was a big mover behind it all.
The young people, those who know who he is, probably know him more for his characters that when he was on ESPN. But this is one of the most influential people in college football, going back, probably into the 50s and 60s. He was one of the forerunners for the media guide.
Right. He came up with his releases it was must read material back then. That these guys would send out stuff. It was just full of stats and dates and things like that, and all kinds of coach speak and things. But he punched it up. He put all kinds of crazy little anecdotes and stories. The cost of gas at a local gas station, what a head of lettuce was. He's giving stock tips, movie reviews. Talking about we flew out to the West Coast for a game with UCLA when and he was a Pitt. He'd rate the airlines that had the best looking stewardesses. He did like Yelp reviews and things like that. This is in the 50s and 60s. And he was just. It was so off the wall that it made a name for him. People said, what? I'm not going to throw these things out anymore. And he threw that into the media guide, and he sort of just took his outlandish personality, his eccentricity, and made a career out of it.
We're talking with author John D. Lucas with the Beano Cookbook, Haven't They Suffered Enough, here on Ruskin and Zach. So time moves on, and in the late 60s, he's doing publicity for ABC Sports. Roone Arledge is running ABC Sports. It's the 100th anniversary of college football in 1969. And what happened from there, John?
You know what? He was looking for a way to sort of set up things, in terms of, I came up with the line in the book. I said that, he's explaining the situation where him and Roone are trying to set up a 1 versus 2 matchup. And I was like, okay, well, you guys were the BCS in the 60s. You were a selection committee, before there even was one. He said, yeah, 2-man selection committee. That's what we were trying to do. So they were working with different coaches and ADs, looking at the schedule, how many lettermen are coming back, where things line up, and saying, hey, what can we do here to set up this, this prime time, or, a late season, 1 game, standalone superpower matchup. How can we pull this off? So they're looking at, you think of all the powers back then. They're looking at, Notre Dame and Southern Cal and Texas and Arkansas and Oklahoma and Alabama, and they're going through. He looked up. He said, Texas, Arkansas. He said, that's the game. They're both going to be good this year. They're going to be preseason top 5. He told Roone, he said, let's talk to both coaches. Let's see, let's see if Frank Broyles and Darrell Royal, if they will move the game from its October. The normal slot was in October, and see if we, tell them we're gonna pump the hell out of this and hype it up, and you guys are going to be, the only game in town, literally. And so Beano went about doing that. He, it was a lot of behind the scenes work. He fed a lot of information to Roone, and the coaches, they pulled it off. It ended up working out very fortuitously for Beano, 1 versus 2. In December of '69, President Nixon shows up, and that sort of cemented his personality and his hold over the game. He was a behind the scenes type kingmaker, mover, and shaker, and that game, probably started it all for him.
And when you talk about that game, Nixon was here. It was a cultural event. Colonel Sanders was here.
That's right.
Inexplicably, Colonel Sanders was on
Billy
campus.
Graham did the invocation.
Yeah. And we've all seen the video of it, but you so rarely hear his name associated with it.
Right. That was one of my favorite parts of the book. We're talking about this, and I'm trying to pull stuff up, asking him, because everybody, these obviously a heartbreaking conclusion for everybody down your way. But everybody knows that last play, the pass, 15-14, they can tell you the final score. I said, well, what are some other things about the game? Everyone knows, okay, Nixon was there, things like that. And he says, oh, yeah, I'm in the press box. And it was just all these politicians. You have all these television executives. Every big-time sports writer in the country was there, every sports personality. And, then he's mentioning, yeah, one moment I'm talking to Reverend Billy Graham, the next I'm hanging out with Colonel Sanders. I'm like, Colonel, Kentucky Fried Chicken. He said, yeah, that's Colonel Sanders.
George Bush
and,
was here.
That stuff just flows out of Beano's mouth. It was, he's not a name dropper. You read the book, there are so many crazy names from sports, entertainment, politics, mafia figures, all kinds of crazy people he had interactions with. But that's the kind of life he lived. He just met these people and wasn't a name dropper. He was more of a name spiller, and that's just one of the great parts about the book and about his personality and things we captured.
Now, for people my age, we remember, unfortunately, 1994. When Beano went on ESPN and said that Ron Powlus was going to win 2 Heisman trophies, and everything went south after that. And everybody sort of associates Beano with Notre Dame. He actually hated Notre Dame.
Yeah, if you read the book, you'll put that together pretty quickly. He was
he's a Pitt guy.
He was very loyal to his alma mater, University of Pittsburgh, and they just couldn't beat Notre Dame when he was growing up. And there was recruiting rivalries here in Western Pennsylvania, and Notre Dame always seemed to get the heads up on that, and it drove Beano crazy. And then, so he really, he waged a behind-the-scenes war with Notre Dame for many years. But yet, many people, if you ask them, Beano Cook, they'll tell you 2 things. They'll tell you the Ron Powlus prediction, like you just mentioned, or they'll say, "Oh no, big Notre Dame homer." Furthest thing from the truth, to be honest.
Yeah. There's a lot of stories in here that people can get the book. But the one thing I did enjoy was that Brent Musburger would steal information from the on-site announcers. When Beano was working at CBS at the start of the NFL Today, he told that story.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many things like that in there, but that's a great example. There was, those guys, they'd have these, the whip arounds, and, there was, the earpiece in, the producers would be talking, okay, we got this coming up next, and we're going to discuss this, and Brent would listen in on, Pat Summerall was talking about, okay, there's a game in Pittsburgh, and we have some injury information, and hey, competitive, the nature of the media game, people jumped in, but that's the way it was back then. There was a lot of that, behind the scenes, infighting, things like that, and I think Beano captures a lot of that in the book in a way that other people never really wrote about. His relationship with Musburger, Howard Cosell, Phyllis George, and all these other big shots. And I think he does a good job describing what, the world network television was back in that heyday. He did not just those stories, but the expense accounts and, the money and the gambling and all that was going on that people really have no clue about.
One of the things I guess I found most interesting is, you see you see him on TV, you hear the stories and all this, but he was a real human that had, he was an industry among himself. He had, drivers, he had, people on staff, and he took care of everybody.
Yeah, he did. That was one of the things when I got to know him, you're surprised because you see this TV character, but he was, just the strange guy. He'd had this stuff, packed up. His apartment looked like, it was like a college football warehouse. There's media guides and, all kinds of notepads, things that, SID send out. He'd have boxes of sweatshirts. There's a Michigan helmet up on the one corner of the bookcase that's signed by Lloyd Carr. There's all these other crazy pictures and things like that. And then, he ran Beano Incorporated. He had his set up there and his people, and and I was one of them. I was fortunate that I sort of worked my way up. I was his chauffeur for a little bit, took him to games, other places, and to doctor's appointments. And next thing I know, I'm co-author of his book. So I'm happy that I was along for part of the ride with him.
John D. Lucas, the book is Haven't They Suffered Enough? The story of one of the most colorful people in the history of college football, Beano Cook. John, thank you for the time today. We really appreciate it.
Hey, guys, I really appreciate you guys having me on. Thank you so much.
All right. That's John D. Lucas with us here. Your drive home powered by Mr. Sparky.
BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports, contests, and events with first-to-market odds and lines. Find reviews and news for every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports information, from live in-game betting, props, and futures. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to join today and make your first sports bet. Use our promo code BELIEVE50 to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. That's BELIEVE, BLEAV 50. That's BELIEVE, BLEAV 50. BetOnline, where the game starts.